data quality and governance, building the foundation for digital transformation success. In this episode, Kramer, the founder of Cooperative Computing, reveals why data quality is the make or break factor in every digital initiative, from CRM adoption to AI implementation. You'll learn how to assess your current data health, practical steps to establish governance frameworks that actually work, and why clean data drives better decisions and higher ROI. I'm your co-host, Anthony Pearl, and whether you're just starting your digital journey or looking to accelerate your existing efforts, it's time to get enabled digitally. Well, hello, Kramer, and welcome to another episode of your podcast. And I think we have got a very special series that we're going to take people through in these coming episodes. And it all starts with this whole idea of the forever journey, the one that never stops. And I think best to fill people in on exactly what that is.
Excellent. Yeah, this is a shift of thinking that we often have to help people think through, because everyone keeps thinking to themselves, oh, this is new, this is revolutionary. This is, the past is totally different than where we're at today. And so there's some key principles that have been around forever. And first key principle starts with the customer. And that customer, whether they're a consumer for your retail stores or whether they're a consumer because you're a business buyer and you're purchasing raw materials for your manufacturing use, no matter what it is, these consumers are all after the same thing. They want what they want, when they want it, at the value they want it. And the customer gets to set the value. This key principle has been around since the first purchase was ever made. When they left the Garden of Eden and somebody said, hey, I need this and you have this and we're going to start swapping things. That value proposition to that customer of what I want, when I want it, at the value I want it, is forever living. That is one key principle.
It's amazing, really, isn't it, when you think about that, but it's so simple. And it has been around for forever, quite literally. And, mixed in with that is the value that people place on it, right? It's such a nominal thing and it's constantly changing.
Yeah, and it's the concept of price is relatively new. So the concept of value, we try to reemphasize that, because you may want a set of $4 earrings that look really good. You don't care if they only last 3 times. You've got 100 of them in your drawer, and that's fine for you. Or you may want $3,000 earrings. You're going to wear them, 5 or 6 times, and you only have 2 of them in your drawer. So value is something different than price. And so those 3 concepts are super critical for the first principle of the ever-living journey. The second principle of this journey that has been around forever is the enablement of that customer wanting what they want, when they want it, and how they want it, at the value they want it, is choices. And this journey of choices has been forever as well. And I use automobile manufacturing as an example because nobody ever raised their hand and said, I need an automobile. But lots of people raised their hand and said, hey, I need to be able to get things from point A to point B, and I need to be able to do it faster than I can today. And so, the old story goes, if you would have asked somebody what they needed, they would have said a faster horse. And the reason that the automobile came about is I know there's a way and a capability to get things from point A to point B faster. Well, what's the purpose of getting things from point A to point B faster? Because I want what I want, when I want it, at the value I want it. And that means going and visit your friends and family. That means going to the store. There's a whole lot of things that can mean, but that is what drives the choice development. And that choice development has never stopped. It's been around forever. And I use automobiles because people can relate to them. I'm a little bit older, so I got to live through some of the early stages of what automobile development meant. But when choices show up, the key constructs of those choices are convergence of those choices. And as those choices converge, they create the art of possible, which leads to the third construct. First construct is the consumer construct. I want what I want when I want it at the value I want it. The second, choices are going to get created and driven by the demands for those three things. And the third construct is that's going to drive new business models, new ways that we actually adapt learning to those new business models, and the ways that we actually utilize that new learning to do those business models. For example, when I first started producing cars, I didn't need to produce 10,000 a day or a week or a month until the demand happened from consumers who saw the choice and liked it. And so those three eternal truths, which is the consumer truth, the choices truth, the business models, and the new ways of learning truth, those have been forever. And so quite often we're meeting with our executive partners and leaders in their businesses, helping them step back for a minute and say that that's an eternal truth. And once you realize that's an eternal truth, then you realize digital enablement isn't a one-time event. The reason we don't use digital transformation is because you don't want to rip your ERP out every 3 years. But you do want to be able to adapt what you're doing to take advantage of those choices and make certain that your new business model can adopt those choices, and you can take those choices and tie them to other choices that start to show up. And in the car business, that was manufacturing. Somebody said, hey, this is really cool. People are going to want a lot of this. And if I'm going to produce a lot of it, I've got to have a new business model. And that new business model has to allow me to train people different, bring them into my business different, because I'm going to need workers to work inside that new business model. So these three eternal choices that have lived forever, or these three principles that have lived forever, are super critical to allow business leaders to shift their thinking into what is it that I need to start to think about and prepare for. And that gets into the construct of the automated economy, digital enablement. How do you look at digital enablement? How do you adopt a strategy that lets digital enablement help you accelerate into that automated economy?
It's such an important differentiation that you have there about, that it is enablement rather than transformation. And I think that's a misnomer that a lot of people have fallen into, particularly in recent times with the strong push around AI and other technologies that are out there, that it's suddenly been that I've just got to transform into a technology-based business, but that's not the case.
100%. Yeah. If you think of transformation and what its core construct is, which is I have to take something that I have to put in a massive change to that to get to the future state. It's much different than the fact that what really occurs is things get enabled and those enablements happen over time. For example, I got to participate really early on in what the internet was, and I got to watch that enablement happen slowly but surely. It wasn't a transformation. It wasn't, oh, we're going to go rip out all of our current systems and how we transfer data around and what do we do. What we did was we enabled them, and we brought these characteristics of choices in, and those choices enabled, one thing after another. Let's just take networking. And when networking started, there was, hey, I'm going to use SDLC, and I'm going to use fiber channel adapters, and I'm going to go use DECnet, and I'm going to go use, some other protocol. And all these things were happening, and those things were enabling those platforms and technologies. And as the world had to scale that, I had to come up with something that enabled how those things talk together. And they were changes that were adapted through these choice mechanisms. So if you had a Windows machine that ran its protocol at that point in time, that protocol for SMB that actually allowed all the traffic to go back and forth between Windows machines, you didn't rip them out. They got to adapt. There was digital enablement that happened to turn them into talking TCP/IP. and that TCP/IP started to run over Ethernet. And these things that were considered transformations were just enablements that happened to allow those choices to get plugged in to the evolution that's constantly happening for those key things that we want to be able to do to get what we want when we want it the way we want it.
I think one of the other principles that I know you and I spoke about before we started recording this was in relation to the difference between buyers and consumers and that important differentiation that happens there. And I think that it is important that we do make that point to everyone, because much like that you've just spoken about, the difference between enablement and transformation is critical to the way people think differently in this space.
Yeah, the word consumer came up, I think, as a word that we use because the people that took the advantage of the early stage technology solutions on the internet were in the consumer space. And they did so because it allowed them to remove borders and boundaries relatively quick. So, whereas I would sell my products or goods inside 5 stores in a city, and then I'd go from one city to the other, I could become online and run things through e-commerce, and the consumers had access to it, and I could go, nationwide relatively quick. That created a mindset of this consumerism only being the private buyer, you and I and our wives and our children. But there's buyers every day that need that same access and need to do so in an elegant, robust, secure, and feature rich capability as I need to accelerate what I'm purchasing inside a business. So this construct that we use, which is you've got buyers, whether they're consumers or whether they're purchasing people within a company, they all need the same things, and we need to be able to work the same way we live at home. And the adoption of those capabilities inside businesses has been slowed down by what we call legacy thinking. And so, as you start to think of the world of buyers that want what they want when they want it at the value they want it, they want the ability to have choices, the process of those choices being rapidly adopted into the environment, so I can buy 5 of something from you and see if I like it, and 5 of something from someone else, and then wherever it is that I like it, I just keep consuming. The whole purchasing process right now and how we evaluate what we're going to buy, how we select what we're going to buy, the process of selection has actually um, slowed us down in our ability to adopt our business models to the capability that the consumer has access to and evaluates things on a minute by minute basis, day by day. So, this construct of what is a buyer, that buyer being both a buyer that's in the private space, you and I, the things that we're doing for our families, and in the commercial space with businesses, you start to think about those as journeys that have to start to equal each other to allow us to scale. It changes your perspective on what you have to do as a business as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's important as well when commonly people use the language of B2B and B2C in reference to what they do, but the commonality is that there's buyers, and even if you think of a simple retail transaction where there's an end retailer that wants to sell a bunch of shirts, but they're not the consumer. The end person who buys them is the consumer who wears them, but in between there are definitely buyers because the retail outlets themselves are buying it from the wholesale manufacturer. And sometimes there's even people in between with all of that when you start thinking about processes of materials and other things. So the whole concept of buyers is not new, but yet we've been overrun by this idea of consumerism, which has underplayed what happens in that whole buyer's journey.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that shift in thinking has been relatively slow in coming because of some of the key attributes that we call the pills, right? And those things that are blocking the legacy thought leader from thinking differently and saying, I'm going to permit you to do something that you couldn't do before through a new way of doing it because of the choices.
I wanted to ask you this because this whole bit that we've been talking about now is about what you just said, thinking differently in it. How easy is that to make businesses that you engage with have that light bulb moment and see, yes, we do need to think about things differently, and some of these words do make a huge difference, and the way that we think about what we're doing as a consequence makes a difference?
I think probably a large percentage, 20 to 30% of our initial engagement with our customers at the executive level is helping them start to do that shift in thinking. We have a whole program where we bring them into what we call the Results Center to help walk them through this construct of how to start to think differently so you can start to free up your mind. Because at the leadership level, you've got to take this new perspective, and then you've got to take the rest of your team through that new perspective. And so it's critical that this mind shift happens, and you've got to invest time. It just doesn't happen accidentally. And so we have a program we've developed to enable leaders to adopt that thinking strategy and start to think about how they're running their business, the things that they are going to permit inside their business for how they're going to run it. We have these 5 key business segments that I think we'll talk about later on. And there's on those 5 key business segments, some key principles you have to think about. And in going through the capability we have in those 3 and 4 day workshops, it helps shift that thinking more rapidly than you do on 15 phone calls. And it's a great advantage for a business leader to be able to adopt that thinking.
And I imagine that the important part about that is how you implement that across particularly larger organizations. Because it's one thing if the upper management get it, but it's a whole nother thing to make sure that the workers at all ends of the spectrum understand the same principles and why that is important to change the way you think.
100%. Yeah, if you look at the people that are already plugged in, the companies that are already plugged into the automated economy, you can see that, especially in the early founders, whether it's Tesla, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Airbnb, the construct across the entire company was we're going to think different. And when we think different, we're going to challenge all the assumptions that are currently out there. And those assumptions aren't just technology assumptions. There's how you do the work, right? There's the organizational structures that are developed to do the work. And then there's the way we measure the outcomes that we get from how that gets done. All of those key characteristics have to be challenged as you're doing that thinking, the way that you're trying to move from one thing to another and get that to get adopted by the company.
Thanks for tuning in. Next time, Kramer tackles the human side of digital transformation. Discover why even the best technology fails without proper change management, and learn proven strategies to drive user adoption and overcome resistance. It's a conversation every leader needs to hear. Check out the show notes for links, resources, and more details from today's episode, including how to get in touch with Cooperative Computing so you can get enabled digitally. This show has been produced by podcastdoneforyou.online. We look forward to your company next time, so don't forget to subscribe to the Get Enabled Digitally podcast wherever you're tuning in.